Hello, I'm Theolyn Cortens, and this, as you can see from the hat, is my Yuletide video 2019. And I've given the title The Return of the Light to this video because I'm going to explore different concepts that have arisen over many thousands of years about the way light reflects our inner state of being in a cycle which is echoed or reflected back to us from an outer cycle. So many generations of wisdom seekers have used the astronomical cycle of the sun as a metaphor for the way our spiritual evolution takes place, also with many changes as we go along our path, our journey through life. At the winter solstice, late in December, the sun gives us its light in the northern hemisphere for the shortest length of time. Depending on how far north or south you live, that will fluctuate. At the North Pole, there will be no sunshine at all. Light has always been associated with enlightenment, and darkness with ignorance and loss of hope. The dimming of the sun and its subsequent return gives us an allegorical story of our heroic journey from imprisonment to release, from poverty to wealth, from ignorance to wisdom. Many ancient scriptures speak of the light of divinity as the sun. In the Bhagavad Gita, the light of 1,000 suns. Throughout the history of mystical experiences, we find many mystics referring to God as the inner light. This is a classic metaphor for the experience of meeting the divine. And there's so many of these that you would just go through centuries to research all the mystics who've used this metaphor of light for their experience of meeting the inner divinity. One of my favourites is from a man called George Fox, who was the founder of the Quaker movement, the Religious Society of Friends, as it's called. And interestingly, they never called themselves, and he never called them Foxites, but he was the founder of the Quakers, and he had some very deep, powerful mystical experiences. And one of the things he said about his inner journey was that he travelled through the ocean of darkness into the ocean of light. One of the earliest associations of the sun as being a god is found in Babylonian mythology, where Shamash is a king, a shepherd, a light of the world. He's the dispeller of darkness. He's a beneficent judge, as well as being a wrathful avenger. He's the healer of the sick. He raises the dead and he rules men. So this is the Babylonian sun god, and that tradition is very ancient. Although Shamash was a Babylonian god, his name appears in the Hebrew tradition. It was in the book of Malachi in the Hebrew Bible, which Christians call the Old Testament. We found this quotation, "The Sun of Righteousness will arise with healing in its wings." And the word for sun in that quotation in Hebrew is actually Shamash. There's more continuity for this story because in another Hebrew tradition, the central candle on the Hanukkah menorah, which is lit at about this time of year, of course, the central candle is always used to light the other candles. And the central candle is always called the Shamash. In the Western tradition, we find the cult of Mithra. Now, this was a god, a Roman god, whose cult was followed by thousands of people, many of them soldiers. It was the religion of the Roman army. And the cult of Mithra therefore began a long time before Jesus and continued slightly afterwards. But this cult also involved the idea of a descent into darkness and the revival of the light. So Mithra was definitely like a sun god, and he precedes Jesus, but there are lots of similarities. The initiation in the Mithraic cult involved spending time in caves and underground temples. This was a kind of sensory deprivation in order to change their state of consciousness. It is likely that they added mind-altering substances to their rituals, which nowadays people might describe as psychedelics, or more correctly as entheogens. An entheogen gives a seeker access to divinity and wisdom. The part of the word which says theo in the middle actually means God. So an entheogen is something that gives you access to God. Mithra was originally a Persian figure, a divinity of light called a Yazata. So he was a judicial figure, an all-seeing protector of truth. And his name is from an Avestan noun meaning that which causes binding. And he is a ruler of contracts and covenants. So you can see the patterns emerging here with these characters of Shamash and Mithra, and of course other god figures that we find in old texts. As I said, the god Mithra is surrounded by myths and stories that are very similar to those found in the story of Jesus. In fact, some writers, some authors, really feel that Jesus was not actually a historical character, because it's really clear that a lot of the mythology around him is so close to that which we find in other sun gods, like Mithra or Horus, for example, in the Egyptian tradition. So here are a few parallels that you find between Mithra and Jesus. Mithra was born on December the 25th to a virgin called Anahita. He was wrapped in swaddling clothes, placed in a manger, and attended by shepherds. He was a travelling teacher with 12 companions who performed miracles. He sacrificed himself for world peace and ascended to heaven. He was described as a good shepherd, described as the way, the truth, and the light, also described as a redeemer, a saviour, or a messiah. His sacred day was also Sunday, and his practitioners celebrated a Eucharist. He was identified both as a lion and as a lamb, and baptism was one of the rituals associated with the Mithraic cult. The birthday of the unconquered sun, the Sol Invictus, was established in a Roman emperor's calendar in 274 CE. That's 274 years after Jesus. And another later calendar lists the same day as the birth of Mithra, but it also says Natus Christus in Bethlehem, the birth of Christ in Bethlehem. So we think that it's about this time in history when the birth of Jesus becomes the 25th of December, matching up with a previous date that was used for Mithra. Actually, the story of Mithra is much older even than the Roman Empire, because Mithra was actually a Zoroastrian figure. And even today, the Zoroastrian tradition celebrates the birth of Mithra on December the 25th, and they call it the Eve of Yalda. So this is one of my favourite pictures in the presentation. Whatever spiritual tradition we belong to, most of us at this time of year, living in the Northern Hemisphere, will feel revitalised when we celebrate with family and friends. These events become a reassurance that even in the bleak midwinter, community and candles will keep our spirits joyful. In this mystical poem, Wallace Stevens describes descending into the depths of his mind as the sun descends at the end of the day. Purple is the twilight colour. His journey is through the loneliest air, because it is the journey of the individual self. The poem continues with a description of feeling at one with the world, losing his ego self, but finding himself more truly. And so we come back to the hermit, who is often associated with Saturn, god of the sign Capricorn, the zodiac sign that begins at the solstice. It is a lonely journey to carry the light when the sun has lost its power. Perhaps this is why we party at Yule and New Year, to stave off the sense of abandonment. Our Father, the Sun in heaven, has hidden his glory, and so we decorate our houses with lights. But when we take time for inward reflection, we can find the sun shines in our own heart. Now, although we celebrate Christmas or the winter solstice or Yalda or Yule, whatever we celebrate, and we invite friends round and we have candles and food and it's a big community thing, there is an element that happens here which is more introverted. Think about the astrology. Sagittarius, the sign of Sagittarius runs right up to the winter solstice. That's when it changes and becomes a sign of Capricorn. The god of Sagittarius, Jupiter, is the god of jollity. He's basically like Father Christmas. And then when you bump up against the 21st of December, you're moving into Capricorn, and the god who takes over is Saturn, who's much more serious and, you could say, introverted. So that becomes a more mystical approach to this time of year. At this time in history, many people feel we are living in tumultuous times. There is a feeling of uncertainty in the air. But also, perhaps, I'd like to suggest a feeling of excitement that perhaps out of the changes that are going on, we humans could develop a new, more harmonious way of living on the planet with due respect for Mother Earth, for our environment, with due respect for each other as divine souls. And so, because I'm an optimist, I would like to close with some words from the philosopher Nietzsche. And I wish you a great Yuletide, or whatever you celebrate, winter solstice, Christmas, Yalda. And I shall be seeing you next year at New Shoots, when I shall film the first newsletter of 2020. Watch and listen. From the future come winds with a stealthy flapping of wings, and good tidings go out to delicate ears.